Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the MokanaMan at YouTube with a Let's Build. We are today at Animasia hobby shop in Melbourne, Australia, located in QV, and the owner wishes me to build a kit and show off his little rig and small workshop. The store is open in the week, not much of an online presence, has a large selection of trading figures as well as Gunpla, lots of Gundam models, bit of Zoids, arm frame girls, a large variety of modelling goods in the anime genre. Soon there will be a larger selection of tools and paints, including SMS, very worthwhile checking out. Today we have the Graze standard command type. That will be the intentions of building a diorama. We'll give her a quick unboxing, check out what we're dealing with, since I've never really attempted one of these models. It's been a very long time since I've done a Let's Build. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 styrene runners covered in plastic, sticker sheets, polycap runner, and nicely printed instructions, everything that you expect from Bandai. Very clear, nice SolidWorks style 3D rendered drawings. Lots of space, you're not going to get too confused building it. Parts breakdown and whatnot. We will give a go at cutting up the first bunch of pieces. Now Dante, the owner, has just introduced to me one of these sticker charts, which comes from China, and it gives you each letter of the alphabet, which you can stick to your runners and easily identify what it is. So when you're sorting through, you can see it very quickly while flipping through your runners. Very, very clever idea. So looking at the instructions, we're going to be removing 3 parts, and since we're very well organised with our stickers, to get rid of a polycap part, PC3, I don't really utilise the nippers, so we've got 3 right here. And just looking a bit down, simply as slicing as close to the part as possible. Being rubber, it's not resistant to sharp surfaces whatsoever. Removes quite easily, no need for buffing or sanding. And we are looking for part number, or runner C. Handy sticker. We locate our parts, so we've got C7 and C6, having a scan, 7, 6, and it's as simple as cutting a good 5mm away from the part with just cheap normal nippers. And then what we're going to do is trim it further down, remove the nub, and give it a bit of a sanding. Looking a lot closer, we can see that the nub is sticking out. We're able to trim it further. Now this feels very much like ABS, so it's a lot more brittle. It snaps off quite easily. Get a very, very sharp X-Acto or hobby knife. Trim it, and either with a sanding file or a sanding stick. This time around I've got a glass file. Lubricate it in a bit of water, and you sand what's left of the nub down until it's nice and smooth. If it's a round or hard to get to surface, sandpaper will be a bit more appropriate. But a file will achieve a nice flat surface and quite an ideal way of having the when paint is applied over, none of the elements, even if it's a quarter of a millimeter, sticking up and being obstructed when we apply gloss or something that would catch the angle or the edge of what's left over. Now we've got what's known as a flash mark. So it's a seam line that where the two molds combined exactly here. When you paint, that's going to appear and it's going to obstruct the detail and not look too good. So it's not too hard to remove. Again, with your file, sanding stick, whatever. You file flat against the surface, have a look, and you keep going until you notice it just disappears and it just becomes absolutely flat. And that was a very, very thin line. It's almost completely gone. I could see a slight silhouette. So we'll go until we're virtually eating or cutting into the material. And that way, once primer and paint is applied over it, it should be fine. How we know we got rid of it? When the part is primed, and if we can still see it, we can sand it again and prime it again before the painting process. Now around the circular bit here, we've got a little more flash. So with sandpaper, a bit wet, I'm going to fold a bit and strategically on each side of the edge touching the circular bit, just buff it out. I'm using 400 grit. 300 grit is really good for cutting. This is good for removing flash or moulding lines. And if that's a bit too coarse and you don't like the texture, you can keep sanding down until 1-2000 grits. Once paint or primer goes over that, it's not even really noticeable. So we're just cutting down our little flash bit on each side of this component, and it's definitely not going to appear in the paint. Now a lot of people might be asking, why would you remove it? It's barely noticeable. I could just snap your kit. If you're entering a competition or you're doing a display and you're trying to make your Gundam or model look almost exactly like the real thing from the anime, or if it's an actual machine walking among us, it wouldn't necessarily have a mold line there because there'll be multiple metal panels that are somehow attached that could be surfaced or accessed. This is the difference of making something from what's a toy into a believable small piece. In a competition, social media, on public display, small details like that will be noticed by someone, and it's what differentiates your model from someone else's model, by how far a detail and what faults you are willing to remove. Now for assembly, the two halves are pretty clean, and we've got our pegs, we've got our holes. Now the holes have breaks, so the tension is not too tight. You push the two in together, you push tight, it's attached together. Being the same colour, there's no colour separation, so we may as well glue it together. If you wanted it to be separatable, there's no harm in making the tension a lot less or a lot lighter by putting your knife in the hole and just widening it via turning it around, or digging the knife into the edge and just widening the hole a bit. Works just as well with a drill bit, and that means we can plug the piece together and pull it apart without it being really, really tight. Now once all the parts are painted and put together for the final time, and you don't want it to be separated later, you can put a tiny amount of clear glue or PVA glue, and that will keep it close tight together. Doing it a few times will give you an idea of how tight or loose you want the joints to be. Be careful not to do the same for articulated joints and only for connecting joints. So we're going to put the two together and just guide it in. Snaps together, and in theory should pull apart very, very easily, and that's just only loosening a bit. Now another problem Gunpla has is when you paint it, you assemble it, you put it together, and you start using enamel or oil-based washes or weathering products. These oils seep into all the joints, and they will go into these pegs and soften them. And if you put any tension under it, especially and including articulated joints, they have a tendency of going soft and just disintegrating or falling apart. Gluing together as many parts as you can and widening the holes, make sure that the parts are not under tension and they do not snap and disintegrate. Another thing to keep in mind when you do use oil washers or assemble, allow all the solvents to evaporate and leave the plastic, what's soaked in, what's sitting there, evaporate as much as possible. Don't handle your kit for a few days until you completely assemble it. When you're applying oil products, also try to be as neat as possible to make sure that none of it does seep into some of these joints. So loosening and spending extra time on all those joints will save you a lot of heartache. Now, since I'm choosing to glue the piece together, my cement of choice is Tamiya Extra Thin. It's simply as applied to where the plastic is going to make contact and puts an extra amount in the holes. Cement can be very, very slow to dry, so I also deploy Tamiya Extra Thin Cement Quick Type. This is a very quick plastic cement glue. However, I find applying it on top of cement accelerates the drying time and makes it able so you can sand or work with your parts a lot sooner. Be careful when you apply glue that you don't touch the surface. It softens the plastic, it melts the two surfaces, so if you put a finger on that area that has glue, it's going to leave a fingerprint behind, and the only way to fix that is to wait for it to dry and sand it off. I'm going to push the two surfaces together. I don't see any obvious seam lines, and that is to stay together as so. And that is glued parts together. Now I've just added a bit of polycap. Notes about polycaps: they are rubber. They do not bite, etch or adhere to glues, putties or cements. They can get weakened, tanned, cast. It cannot really be sanded or abrased. It sort of gets all stringy and falls apart. The best thing you can do is attach it to where it needs to be, and generally try not to apply any product. If it's sandwiched between two parts and putty and paint is required, a little bit of masking such as tape or blue tack goes a long way. Yet, if a slight amount of paint or glue or putty does get onto it, it's not the end of the world. The easiest way to cut it out again is with the knife, and if the polycap does not quite fit where it needs to go, forcing it doesn't go far and reshaving it is not necessary. Since most polycaps look the same, there is a chance to recheck the instructions and to see if you have utilised the correct part. Now we've got just a traditional peg. So there's a bit of tension, but it's quite loose. It goes in there, that's fine. You can separate it and paint it or permanently glue it in. It's all the same colour. If you wanted to go something custom, you could keep it separated, but generally the less parts to paint and the bigger they are, the better. So I'm going to chuck a small amount of cement. Not too loaded as to droop all over your work. That's the beautiful thing of the Tamiya brushes. A little bit of accelerant. The accelerant is not necessary. It's just something I like to do. And we will jam this bit in. There you go. And we're fine to go. So that's not bad. So I've done the same thing with this one. I've got the half part and I've widened the holes with a knife. It is very, very loose. There is no tension. When I put the two together, it holds together and it won't fall out. Separates very nicely. We'll put the polycap in there and glue it together. Also notice when it's together, it's very flush, but we're seeing all sorts of tabs and tags for different sort of armour to stick over it. This means all of the seam lines are hidden and there's no needing for treatment or covering with putty. Very, very convenient since this is going to be a quick build. So now we've got everything tested fit. I've put the poly cap, I put it in the wrong way, so there's a large gap when I repositioned it. It was all good. We've got the other part. This is just simply a test fit, and if I see no gap all the way around, then we can apply glue and glue her down. So the seam is all glued. We've glued all the parts of the glue in the accelerator. I'm going to hold it together with my fingers. Hopefully the accelerator will kick in very fast, and it should tighten with that nice gap. So we're now faced with a round piece, not a flat piece, and we've cut it off the runners and they're raised nubs. Now a file will be inappropriate to remove because then you're going to flatten off the round bits, and it may not be noticeable at first, but after painting, or maybe if you get a bit too complacent and sand it too much, it can be too flat in some areas. Big circles or wheels, not a problem. Gun barrels and small pipes, definitely. So with a bit of sandpaper at a pretty high grit, 400 higher, we're just going to contour around the surface and just keep sanding until we can't pick up the nub with our fingernails. And it's actually on a raised lip, not the actual round surface, so that's just the way it goes. And there we go, very quickly just buffing around the free surfaces after cleaning up with a knife, nice and clean. So we're snapping on this piece. It's very easy once it's cleaned up. It actually has a decent amount of tension, but it's fairly loose. There's nothing you need to really do. Just click in and away you go. Nice and easy. This can be removed later, painted, bit of PVA glue underneath, and it'll snap together permanently. So we will be giving that a different colour. Yellow is a bit pretentious, maybe copper. We are working with a bit of a piston piece. It is safe to assume that there's a flash line that goes all the way around. I can't see it, I'm assuming it. Give it a bit of a buff all the way around. Now we've got a flash line all the way across here, and it's very, very noticeable. So don't worry about it. So there's going to have to be a mix of sanding the flat areas and sandpaper around, and this is a good example of, we could see the panels of the mechanical detail if the robot existed, but a flash line going all the way across, picked up in paint and washes, will not be as noticeable. And that's the sort of work we're looking at. Running our fingernail down, I can't really feel much of it. There might be a few gaps that I can, though this is the sort of work we do, so it's not too noticeable when being scrutinised in person, and will look a lot better. If you're ever test fitting a piece and you haven't loosened the peg enough, using a knife but at the back end instead of the sharp end, you're able to loosen it out without causing any sort of damage to the part. This way we can widen the holes, even wide pegs, by carving out the outer edges, maybe sand the pegs down a bit, and it should be a lot looser fit. One have to widen the holes, a little bit of putty had to be put in because it got seen outside the part, which we will put in. And then we've got a piston here, and the piston is very cool, but they come with a huge disadvantage. It goes in and out. When we paint that, we paint the cylinder and we start playing with it, it's just going to shred the paint off, and that's going to be quite ugly, especially to be a few coats. Before painting, the diameter of the piston is going to be heavily sanded down with a very rasp file, and then smoothed out so it's significantly smaller than the sheath. This way when it's painted and it goes in and out, it's not going to get scratched. We have so far a torso. It's pretty cool. It's got articulation and everything. Now, before I snap this in, I'm going to cut the pegs off, make them nice and short. So when I snap it into here, I can pull it out again later, and then later after painting, permanently glue it in. So the two halves are being glued together, and we should be using Mr. Hobby dissolved putty. It's very, very quick. We just draw a line around all the surfaces that has the gap, and they get sanded back at another date, like so. You don't have to be too neat because it's going to be all sanded up. So we've assembled the head. It's very easy, no seams, comes in one part. The shoulders did have to be filled, the rest of it's quite nice. And the next that we did was sandwich the shoulder joints between the two parts and a bit of putty right on top of the piston. It's going to go into the ball joint and move around. We're going into day 2 of our Animasia build. The last video was about 6-7 hours and we've got half the inner frame done. At the moment we are dealing with the seam lines that were filled. So there's only a couple, about 3 to 4. And using wet sandpaper, we are cutting it down using 240 grit, 400 grit, and polishing it with 2000. So day 2 was only an hour. We have sanded all of the seams, wet sanding obviously. We assembled this component. Lots and lots of flash, so that got all sanded, and where I believe the seams will show, that's been puttied. Day 3 we'll clean that up and finish the inner frame. Hello, day 3 on our Graze build for the Let's Build series at Animasia. We're going to be building the diorama before we crack straight into the kit. Now, I can actually turn the camera around. We've got a Daiso right across the road. So we went shopping there. I bought this tea plate serving thing. Flat down is practically a base, utilising exactly what's in the local economy of this hobby shop. So if you come here to shop, you've got a Daiso there, they've got useful stuff, and around the corner of the Daiso is an Artwright, and they've got some pretty cool stuff too. Now Dante the owner was very, very nice to let me to cannibalise his cardboard, and what we're going to do with a Sharpie is start drawing not really mountainous terrain, but structures or unevenness to the earth, so it's interesting looking. Most grounds you will not find to be perfectly flat unless it's in a built-up city environment. Even there it's going to be a bit hilly, so we're going to form some slopes to make it look more interesting. I've also got the idea of curving some chicken wire at the back and gluing some cotton bud and having a heavy brown snow, much like the final conclusion scene to the Iron-Blooded Orphans anime. So I've been cutting out the terrain in blocks, drawing it out, cutting out further, and it's just pretty much a sandwich of PVA glue and a bit of cardboard. Nothing too difficult or hard, and it's almost starting to look a bit like a riverbank or something. I might have a bit of a formation there as well. So very easy. Once that's all laid, I'll put more PVA glue and spread it around a bit. So we've got the elevation all done, and we're just going to apply a bit more PVA glue on top. It shrinks anyway, a bit slow to dry. And we're going to spread it around a bit with a cotton swab to make sure it's all nice and sealed. and that's probably just push it up against edges, spread it out so the cardboard is completely coated and caked in glue. If it gets wet or anything happens to it, it's going to dry harder, it's going to be waterproof, it's going to take textures and other things a lot easier, and you make sure that there's just enough surface there that it's not going to get damaged or anything. The sides will hit it with a bit of wood putty. Hopefully that would be something we can do in about several hours time, closer to tonight. Diorama making is very, very messy. I was a bit concerned about doing it away from home, but being a tad careful, it can be done at club meets and public and whatnot. Now, as mentioned in day 2 of the video, I've got a series of sandpaper laid out, and I'll pick it up. So we've got about 4 grits. I write the grits inside the sandpaper, and using it wet and dry. Where we also have nubs, we also have the putty, and this is the result of directly applying Mr. Dissolved putty on top of a glued seam. And the idea is when it's sanded flat, all that's left in there is the putty inside the actual seam itself. Don't sand too hard because the putty does have a tendency of being a lot softer than the plastic. So I'm going to start with the 240 grit sandpaper, and once it starts wearing out and looking pretty transparent, such as so, I move down to 400 grit sandpaper. And I'm going to keep sanding it until almost there's no evidence of the putty left, and buff it up with 2000 grit. What's going to happen later is I'm going to prime the whole part in primer. Primer does have multiple purposes besides paint adhering to the surface. I'm able to see any further imperfections. Is there any small holes or a sink gap left in the seam line? This gives me the opportunity to re-putty it, re-sand it, re-prime it, and when it's all absolutely perfect, I'm able to paint it and finish it, and there will be no evidence of imperfections later. If you're doing a weather dirty kit, not so important. If you're doing a high gloss fancy finish, very, very important. How hard you sand is also quite important. At a higher grit, around 200, you'll go quite light. The higher grit to 2000, you can afford to go a lot harder. Now this bit, I accidentally spilt some glue on it, so there's a fingerprint. Once fully dried in 24 hours, that could be buffed and sanded. The seam was also very wide. Super glue was added into it, followed by putty. This will be sanded later and will be perfectly fine. So we are finished. We've got the inner frame. Very interesting. I'm quite impressed for this for a no grade or an RE. It's got a wide variety of articulation, and a lot like the Iron-Blooded Orphan high grades, the armour just snaps on all over the place. So I'll be making some of the armour and putting on, but at a later date, the session 4, I will need to return to the legs and do a bit of sanding, especially with the hips. We apply all the armour on it. Once the test fitting is pretty happy, the arm will be stripped off, put it in a bag, we airbrush and paint the frame, and then we'll airbrush every individual piece of our frame and apply it on at a later date. We are up to day 4, and what we got first is the diorama, where we're applying putty on it slowly, so the PVA glue's all dried and it's on there quite solidly. We've also got our finished inner frame. There's a bit of putty that requires sanding. I think it requires sanding, I'm not too sure. So we will probably deal with that today, and that's all we'll probably have time for. For the base, what I'm using is Timbermade's wood fill. Any sort of wood putty pre-mixed or post-mix will do. I just pull out a ball bung it somewhere and just slowly smooth it out and sculpt it to make those rigid cardboard hills a little more smoother and contoured. So that's going to take a bit of time. And this is the elevation. It's all in real nice. Gonna put some rocks on it and then some sand at a later date. For now we'll stick some magnets in. We'll find out later why. We are down to day 5 and the putty is nice and hard. So we're going to sliver it in PVA glue, which is going to take again forever to dry. And we'll put some rocks on it. All we have to do is with the Q-tip, we're just going to spread it out and we'll place some rocks on it. PVA glue is all spread out and we've got a selection of rocks scattered all over the place randomly and focused in some areas. So again, we'll allow this to dry and then we'll put some texture paint on it later. And that would be the ground bit of the base done. There is going to be a bit of a cloud section, though we'll cover that at a much later date. At this stage of many few hours stints, one day, sometimes 2 days a week, I've lost track of what day it is. This is how far we've got. A base that needs a little bit of more texturing in a frame, and we're just slowly cutting off each bit of armour, cleaning it up, adding it to the body. Once it's completely test fitted, we're able to remove everything, put it in little bags and start painting. Though the important thing is, all seam lines are filled. So many days later, we've gotten this far in the armour, not too far to go in the build. So priming will be very shortly. So we've cleaned up these pieces and we can see that there are these little hole detail. So what we're going to do is use a drill bit and drill it out to make it more intense, deeper and dynamic. So what we do is we get a knife at the centre and make the groove for the very tip of the drill bit to go in there, and we're able to just drill through with a pin vise. Very easy process, worthwhile tool to buy. And you've got the two clear differences, with and without the holes going all the way through. So after a few weeks, you have it completely built, finished. So if you're just happy snapping it or panel lining it, this is the finished model you're going to get with. And to tell the truth, it's not bad at all. It looks very master grade-ish. Got the weapons, and also quite a bit of the inner frame is also exposed, so a lot of that will be painted. Articulation's quite nice. It's got a massive range of parts and poses it could go into, and little gimmicks like the head opening up and a few part swaps. And since in the Iron-Blooded Orphans series story that everyone's got the same mobile suit or Gundam frame, the instructions indicated that you can swap parts with other models and put armour of this on a Barbatos or vice versa. We're going to break them down, sort out the parts and start painting. We've got everything apart. First we're going to widen the holes in these pistons, so when they're painted they're not exactly going to scratch and wear out. This is easy as drilling a hole. It doesn't look like much, but there's about a little more than a mil gap between the piston and the piston hole. It should be able to glide with no issue and no paint scratching whatsoever, regardless of how many layers that I apply. And we've got all the parts in the various colour groups, the main big three. But these ones I'm choosing to be different colours for my own personal taste. We're going to have those as a bronze or a copper, and it's just going to really offset nicely all of these parts. So we'll be putting them in sandwich bags. So sandwich bags are your friend. Some of them may look overkill to get the really big ones. You may only have 1 or 2 parts, but you don't want to lose a small sandwich bag with small parts. Get a standardized size, get a very big one. Write the name of the colour, because when you prime it, you're going to forget what colour it is and what colour to paint things, and it just makes it so much easier. You take it in and out of the bag to paint, and it doesn't come out until assembly time. So we've got all the parts mounted on metal skewers. I've got Mr. 1500 finishing grey primer, airbrush, booth. We're going to thin this primer 50-50 in this glass jar, pour it straight in the brush, and just dust on a light coat. So we're mixed. We know that it's a good mix when you splash the primer up against the glass. It slowly drips down until it goes all transparent. If you splash the primer on the glass and it's solid, it's too thick. And if you splash the primer on the glass and it leaves no taint or stain behind, it's too thin. This is probably borderlining too thin, but a low PSI, it should be fine for me. For the beginner airbrusher, you probably want to add a little more primer. I'm going to do some lines. As I thought it's a bit too thin, we'll add some more primer. More like it. Still very transparent, still very light, but this isn't in a frame. There's parts that are going to snap onto it. We don't want the paint to be too thick whatsoever. Normally I'll put a much thicker coat on the outer armour or a solid kit. Now, to prove how transparent the paint is, when we put down a coat, and now this is a large bit, you're always moving the airbrush. You start spraying off, and then you just constantly spray. You can either go in bursts or one continuous go. And you can see that every pass I've done a coat, and you slowly build it up until the colour is solid. And there we go. We got solid primer, surface, solid primer. When I go back to a single coat, you can see that it's not quite solid primer. It's very dark, it's very transparent, it's not there. It's better to have multiple thin coats than one thick coat. One thick coat has the ability of kicking up dirt, dust, spots, lumps, all sorts of things that are not quite desirable. So that's roughly the best way of going. Now, if you're to do a dry coat is where it's so thin it virtually dries straight to the touch. A wet coat is where you pull a bit back, you go over a few times, and it's wet. So if I was to touch that, I'll leave a fingerprint. On my dry coat, when I touch it, it's virtually dry as. So there are your two different strokes, and that is colouring a bit in with primer. Make sure when you're spraying, you get every nook and cranny wherever you airbrush, so there is no missing spots. This is most important for your base coating, but you're highlighting, you want to miss points and parts where they will create shadows and effects. Being mindful, inside your tip on the crown, you're going to build up primer, and this only works with primer. When that primer build-up becomes too big, it's going to push all of that on your model, and you're going to get these strange lumps or build-up or splatter effects. Please remove that from time to time with a Q-tip until it's absolutely flat again. Like so. Pull the needle back, and then just spray a jet to make sure that the paint on the needle doesn't go on the model. Everything is primed, and again with 1500 pre-mixed, it is very, very easy to apply and quick as demonstrated. Primer is good for showing imperfections that you can re-putty and sand. It also uniforms the colour and make the paint sticks far better to the plastic. Now we're going to do the base coat of black, a clear gloss, metallics, shading, detailing, then one more gloss with a bit of a wash. Everything has been sprayed with metallic black. and I've just been asked why gloss black underneath metallics. Gloss black reflects light, and paints are pretty much transparent, especially silver. So light can penetrate the pigment and bounce off or absorb into the surface. If the surface is dark and highly reflective, the light will hit it, bounce back, opposed to being absorbed into a grey flat primer. So if you paint a spoon that's grey and a spoon that's gloss black, you'll see a difference in intensity. Using metallic on top of this, we're going to see a greater intensity in sheen and a brighter complexion in less coats of pigment. So we're painting the base today, and we've got the Tamir soil effect. It's no good in colour, but it's perfect in texture. It needs to be a bit thin. You chuck a little water in it and brush it across the surface. And this is the texture. It's looking really good. Make sure to thoroughly clean your brush in thinner and underwater, not to destroy them. We bend the joins all the way to one direction to paint inside. Once dry, we'll bend it in the other direction to paint inside, level it and colour it in. The rest of the parts are being painted in a rusted gunmetal. So we have everything painted in the iron colour. We're going to shade the bottom bits of each piece with black. So you can see that these are the tones of the metallics I've used compared to black. The middle one is the iron that's coloured in, and the top and bottom are what was used to shade the bits. And you can see it's very subtle that the bottom is a little darker and the top is just ever so lighter. Doesn't have to be too obvious. And another bit, you can actually see the colour gradient, or not colour gradients, light or intensity gradients. And that's all the inner frame stuff painted. We're going to wait for that dry, hand paint some details, give it another top coat, then wash it. Next we are hand painting, just lacquer and a very fine tip brush. You can see that there's just a couple of areas that I've picked out with the paintbrush, and the other one is not. It's just nothing special. It's a large brush, and all you're doing is you're painting within the lines of a tiny area and colouring it in. In the event that you go over and you spill into areas that you don't want to, you get the colour that you painted the main base coat and paint over it once everything has dried. That's a tiny bit of colour picking. Does make a big difference, especially with metallic surfaces and inner frames. So that's everything hand painted, and you can see just little bits of detail just pop, small little areas just highlighted, and then they'll neatened up. They were slightly airbrushed. The gun's got a few dots. The leg's got a few dots. It's because it's very dark, it just needs something to break it up a bit. So using these jewellery bits for a mobile phone, we've done a lot of the bronze bits. So this one is multiple colours to look like it's an afterburner effect, getting all burnt out and whatnot. We've got some hydraulic pistons and all sorts of stuff, just being a bit playful with the shading that's going to be on the inner frame. When mounting parts, I use these electrical alligator clips, normally mounted on skewers. I found a place that attaches a metal wire on it for you, like a business card holder, and I only exclusively attach it to the place that the paint will not be seen and it's going to be connected. When priming, you want to cover all the pieces, all the plastic in primer. If you have any bare plastic, and that bare plastic later gets in contact with thinning medium such as enamel thinner, turpentine, washes and whatnot, it could cause some problem. So when you're doing your sludge washes, be a bit careful, not sloppy, only paint the intended painted surfaces. Don't let it run. This one, there's nothing to grab, so I broke a toothpick in half and rammed it in the hole. So you just got to be a bit careful, and for these tiny bits where there's nothing to grip onto, be careful that they can be pinched and just fly off. A little blue tack or another method such as double-sided tape may be more appropriate. And here is all the pieces on their skewers ready for primer. You can see that they're all connected at various points and configurations. So I've got these magnets on the base, and they're going to be holding up a wall that's wire mesh. The wire mesh, next week we'll have some cotton wool glued to it to look like a giant cloud of smoke. And it's just going to sit something like that. So it'll look like a very interesting diorama piece. So this bag of bits is done in all of its beautiful glory. It's time to work on 2 bags at once. The compressor, airbrush, filter's gone strong, someone's painted way too much red. We have these collection of small parts to paint individual colours. We'll prime it by 1500 by mixing it in the pot. Now, when I was talking about doing the wash with the Tamiya accent colour, you pretty much just got a brush and brush the whole thing in the wash. Let it get soppy and slightly puddly. With a bit of tissue, it was just nearly whipped off like that, just lightly, the strength of the paper brushing up against the surface of the material. It soaks up enough of the wash to leave the detailed panels behind. Got to remember to mix that primer really good. The needle nut is missing out of this airbrush. The experience is always different when you're using other people's equipment, and here it is. So that's the strangest encounter I've ever had airbrushing. Needle's all the way in there. Chuck on this needle nut. There we go. So with the gold, which funnily looks good, is the big no-no of mixing some acrylic and lacquer gold. There was only dregs in the bottle. Putting a bit of thinner, running it just through the airbrush, and managed to get a competent finish. With these white pieces, we're going to do the underside grey, the top side white, and give it pearl. Always really like this Gunzi copper. Looks pretty sweet. We've got the undercoat there ready to apply. This is one of the few colours I would definitely consider in being quite sexy. So using these 3 other colours, burnt iron, gun chrome and steel, we've done a lot of the bronze bits. So this one is multiple colours to look like it's an afterburner effect. getting all burnt out and whatnot. I've got some hydraulic pistons and all sorts of stuff, just being a bit playful with the shading that's going to be on the inner frame. Hello Dante.
Hello.
We are back to the series. We haven't touched this model in many months and we're going to finish shortly. Hello. So we've got everyone working. We've cleaned the airbrush booth. We're going to crack open the kit. So we've got the Graze. Crack her open. Now the whole smoke wall I threw out because it stank and it looked terrible. So it's going to stick to the diorama. And this has not been looked at for ages, so we've got all the parts, some painted, some not. And these green mounted bits are what's going to be painted today. All the parts are drying. We've used a new airbrush. Just Mr. Surface of 1500. It's a beautiful job. And we sprayed the diorama as well. It is. Always wear a mask. So we sprayed black. So base coating is done. We've done the oxidized red for our Martian surface. So we've just laid down the stainless steel and it's looking smooth as, even though it's a quick, very rushed job. A gloss and any sort of orange peel or subtle effects will disappear. We're going to do a bit of shading as per the box art, a highlight, super silver, low lights, steel. Now it's very important to paint on black because it just applied like butter. It was so smooth, the coat was so thin and it just came out nicely. The base, I did some highlights at the top of the hill in red. I'm probably going to do the valley in a tiny amount of camo green to dust on. There'll be some sort of wash later, and that's going to be called done. It's pretty much Martian soil. So the silver is all shaded. Some areas are dark, some areas are light, with 3 different types of shaded metal, ready to accept the candy coat or the clear green to give it that shiny metallic green look. This is all properly dried to the touch. Not properly matured, but that's alright. We'll be very careful, thin coats, and get it very much like that box art. Diorama's been shaded with multiple colours. It's a very Martian-ish looking surface, black border. A slab wash another day, and it's completely done. So clear green has been applied. Some moonstone, Mr. Crystal colour's been applied. That's pearlescent, so it's candy, but it's also very shiny. We're going to be putting a touch of matte on it, just to frost it up a bit, and then we shall get into weathering. So just a little bit of tiny light weathering. So we've got a Bandai LED and a GNX, so I'll turn her around. We'll see the ring on the back. Yeah, so that's the idea that you get. It's a pretty interesting product. One of these assemblies, Zaku heads. So today's haul is pretty decent. Painted the whole diorama, and the biggest lot of parts. Another quick day in paradise. So we pretty much thinned this 50-50, and with a wide brush we brushed it all over the base. There's a few imperfections on the edges, so that was touched up with some SMS black. More or less, when dried, it's done. The parts have dried nicely and actually look really great with the candy and the pearlescent. I'm gonna give it a wash. Next time, just slightly chip or weather the edges, and yeah, it's all good. So this thing is cool as fuck. You can put the wash or the pigment on top and the thinner below, and just get the mix consistency just right. and apply it to the model so I can get it nice and thick. Mix it in the halfway point and apply. Full review on my version will be done, but more or less it's a circular piece of aluminium that's been CNC'd. What I've got in there is just SMS black wash. So we've added sludge wash, or the pin wash, to all the bits. It's nicely highlighted. Do some more weathering methods next time. So we have bought these makeup pencils. Very, very, very soft, and ever so dabbing them onto the corners of surfaces, you can get a very, very subtle weathering effect of these paint chips on corners. And then I did a big X on that tab, sealed it all in SMS flat clear. I've started rubbing it with my finger to see if it would come off or not, because the mere pigment by itself does. It can be applied on a gloss or a matte surface. A matte surface will obviously bite in easier, and yeah, it's pretty good. So it's something that will have its own standalone video at some point. Let's actually do it on the Graze. So very lightly I outlined the edges with black, and I put tiny bit of paint chips with the silver around the black, and it doesn't look like much, but it just adds a little more definition. We just need to add some grime marks with a bit of washes and filters, and it's done. Okay, so can you see it? Yeah. Yep. So this is a very soft makeup pencil, and what I'm able to do is just with the side, not the tip, the side, we just glance over the edge. If you get it in the wrong area, you thoroughly wipe it off with your finger and just glance across the edge. And this gives the edge a highlight of black, where there's also a black wash in the panel lines. So we've got black edge, we've got a black wash. It gives it that outline, hand-drawn cartoon look. So there you go. It's very, very subtle. And then with a silver pencil, it's exactly the same. You just add little dots at the edges, and these are paint chips. And you focus on raised areas, corners, and some of the areas you dab really hard, and some you just dab really, really softly. And we're just highlighting a few chips on the edges, just so it's got that paint wear look, and when you look at it at different angles you can see the paint chips. And maybe some parts on the body, just the odd paint chip here and there. And we make it completely random. Might do the odd dash, so it's like a scrape mark. And there you go. That's weathered. Now this rubs off really, really, really easy and quickly. So I've got pre-mixed flat clear, and we just lightly seal it in. And that's it. And in a few minutes that will be dry, hardened, and good. So the parts are a bit too mattish, though they've got all the edges weathered. So if you look really close, you can see very, very subtle weathering. And we're just going to paint the centre bit a bit gloss and do a bit of shading, and the rest is going to remain matte and be playful with the finishes. A few grime streaks, done. Dance. So utilising this, it's full of thinner now because we're cleaning. We were able to do paint streaks and little bits of rust in some of the nooks and crannies. So these green pieces are absolutely finished and will require a little bit of time to dry. The mix of matte and gloss, all the weathering, chipping, and the paint marks really make it worthwhile. So the green is done. We're down to the dark green. These are the last of our parts. Mounted on the skewers. I forgot I've actually primed them, so we'll do gloss black and immediately to gold for a dark candy. This time we'll allow a few days to dry before we put on the clear green. So black has been applied and gloss coat to allow for the metallic shine to come through, followed by 1 coat of gold. The second coat is just about to be applied, a little time to dry, and some copper highlights in other areas. This will be the end of our session, and then we'll do the candy coat next time. So at one end we've got gold, the top it's brass or bronze, and when we put the clear green over it, the 2 tones will be very, very different, and because they're golden, copper or bronze, it's going to stand out a lot different from the silvers, so the tones will be just dramatically different. So we've had some bad luck. We've applied clear green on the gold, it applied well, but on the copper, very, very poorly. It just slid off. So what we're going to have to do is put a clear coat and then coat it. So we applied about 3 coats of candy, and it is dramatically darker and a different tone to when we did it on the steel and stainless steel. It's drying quite nicely. It did bead in the first few coats and equaled out much later on when it got thicker. I put the tiniest lick of matte, so it's still shiny, but it's going to take to weathering products. And I pin washed bits of the detail. Next we'll be doing the highlights and going straight into assembly, as I'm not going to do grime streaks with these bits. These will be a different intensity of weathering. So we weathered the edges, gave it a top coat of matte, and then a little bit of gloss so it's partially satiny glossy. And what we're going to do is lay all the parts out and start assembling with PVA glue and a cotton swab. So we've got a layout of all the parts completed. Just about to assemble by applying the tiniest amount of PVA glue in the joints and sticking them together so it doesn't rely on the tension, it relies on adhesion. Once it's fully assembled, a final amount of touch-ups will occur and we can display. Remember how we loosen that hole up so there's articulation? Well, paint's not scratching so the hole is nice and big. And the frame looks good, PVA glue, and we're only gluing the joints so we don't have too much seeping out. So we've got the inner frame and it's on the base, so the assembly process is very slow as you don't want to scratch the paint. You really take your time. Shouldn't snap together in 10-15 minutes. Don't be afraid if it takes a few days, several hours, whatnot. Got some singing in the background. Don't quit your day job, mate. So it's just almost done. Came out more or less exactly how I want it to. I'm going to slightly dust the feet with a little bit of oxidized red and sand at the bottom of the thrusters, matte the tip of the gun, and stupid me forgot to paint that area in, so it's just going to be black. I am calling this finished. So we dusted a bit of oxidized red and sand on the bottom of the feet, so it's dirtied up a bit as the same colour as the diorama, as well as the bottom of the thrusters, and we matted the tip of the gun barrel so it's not so Homeboy here is just about to do a bit of graffiti, or is he going to paint a Gundam in public? Oh, since it's clear paint, it's not going to appear on the concrete. Man, look at this gangster go. Don't forget to rotate. Now normally I spray and top coat individual parts, but this is another way to do it. The topper and higher areas are going to get a very high gloss, and the bottom lights is going to be a lot less glossy because it's not being attracted to the build-up of clear paint. Spear fingers. Oh yeah. So we've got this photo booth, and got the finished model. And we've got the use of the matte on the corner and gloss on the outside, all different tones. You can see the weathering, it's very subtle, bit of brown on the feet. Rotate them around. I'm really happy how this came out. So it's very shiny, but at the same time it's got filth and dirt, scratches and all sorts of things. Works well with the diorama too. Have a look at the back. We can see some of the inner frame bits and the brass and all that sort of stuff. Very happy how this turned out. So this concludes the Graze 1/100 build. I thoroughly enjoyed the kit, the proportions, the detail, the armour, the slope, the chamfers. I really like everything about it. The detail is quite nice. I enjoyed painting the inner frame as dark as I did and then going quite glossy for the armour. The inner frame is not weathered or dirtied at all, but because it sort of just disappears and it almost looks like a floating armour bit with a small amount of brass and copper just popping out, really works. The inner frame is super glossy, sort of metallic, and then outside you've got the top shoulder head that's very glossy, and then it starts to matte as it goes down, especially around the joins. The pencil really takes out the edges. I've never really got the edges done right, but with the different panels shaded and then separated by the edges with the tiny amount of paint chips, that weathering pencil just worked wonders. I think I'm going to be doing that from builds from now on. Though this new approach of a candy, very clean shaded finish, with a slight amount of weathering, a little bit of dirt and whatnot, and strategic places going down then up. So a little weathering while it's still on individual pegs, and then final weathering once it's completely assembled. Just the composition of it really works, and the diorama holds it together. Looking at it, you can tell that it almost pops out of the anime. Though, yeah, I think this kit has been absolutely nailed. Even though I've had a little bit of bad luck this later game around September of 2017 in finishing kits and getting stuff that I really like. So definitely look forward to a tutorial on the use of those weathering and makeup pencils. And I thoroughly hope that a video that just draws everything together from the very start, cutting things off the runners, removing the nubs, to what do I glue, what do I not glue, what seam lines I fill, painting choices, priming choices, organisation, the whole process from A to Z of my current method of building a kit, which mind you is very different to a few years ago, all the way to up to 7 years ago, 8 years ago when the channel is founded. And looking at the evolution of my style, I'm very happy. So what is going to be the go is this model is going to remain on display at Animasia for a period of time in the windowsill that you've seen. So anyone in Melbourne or Australia that's quite local, you'll be able to visit this kit for a period of time until the next sponsored build is built. Animasia is a proper distributed store in Australia. They've got quite a few interesting kits of the Gunpla range, as well as the full catalogue to order stuff, though they also sell a basic range of tools, SMS paints, and a lot of interesting model related stuff, as well as toy related stuff. I do enjoy the fact that there is a small modelling studio workplace, so you're able to watch people work actively there, or if the right person is in shot, you can have a couple of techniques or skills demonstrated, ask questions. A lot of the staff do have at least the minimum basic building skills, so you're able to definitely get something out of a visit to this shop, even if you don't buy anything. That more or less concludes this video. I hope you've enjoyed the watch of it. It's most likely going to be very long. I haven't quite edited it yet. So thank you very much for watching. As always, until next time, stay tuned for further content. Let's Build used to be a very popular thing in the past on YouTube with snap builds. I haven't done one for a long time, and I hope that my little twist on it with the painting, the modifying, the drilling and everything else is appreciated, enjoyed, and something that's informative. Have a look at the description section. I always put reference material there, links down below to Facebook and whatnot. We have updates on current builds. We also have a video once or twice a week. Anything happens on Facebook, obviously we'll transfer to YouTube, and vice versa. Any questions, happy to answer down below. Sorry I've kept this project a bit shy or hidden. Didn't know when I was going to get finished at this rate. It sort of just popped together. And I'm just about to crack open and do another sponsorship build with Animasia. So look forward to progress of that, and you may or may not catch me in the shop working on it for a few hours every week. See you later, guys, and bye.